Okay, so this is another video about probably the most controversial issue of our times, or at least certainly of this year, and it is race and racism, and a particular issue around that. Now, I was recently accused by one of my subscribers, or at least someone who came onto my video, of being obsessed by this subject and talking about it a lot. On that point, all I can say is I talk about things that I think are topical that I think need to be spoken about. And if some things I cover more than others, that's just because they are topical. Now, there might be a school of thought that sort of says, well, talking about it just gives it more attention and it just fuels the fire. I don't agree with that because I could sort of say, oh well, I don't want any, I can't be bothered with the controversy, so I'll just ignore it, or I'll just self-censor and just decide not to talk about it. And in some ways, that would be a lot easier. It would save me a headache of then having to respond to comments that are critical. But I'm not going to be silenced. You know, in a free society, we all have freedom of expression. That's sacrosanct. And with it comes responsibility. I try to be responsible. That's all there is to it. So if you don't like what I'm saying, you're welcome to challenge my views, respond, whatever. But I'm not going to be silenced. Right now, the subject of race is so sensitive. And I think that's very sad. I think it's very sad that there cannot be just reasonable conversations about this. It just gets so, I hate to say tribalized, but I do believe Black Lives Matter is responsible for stoking up a lot of tensions. There, I said it. Um, I'm not saying that things were perfect before, but I'm convinced if you compare August 2020 to May 2020 was better because whilst there were certainly issues in society, the protests of June, which let's face it, were largely imported from the United States, um, they've really created they haven't created a conversation, they've created a toxic atmosphere. And that's not the same as saying there aren't legitimate issues around, for example, police brutality. But we always see this prefix as a black person, as a person of color. Well, I'm saying as a white person, I'm in the majority, so I'm not going to claim I know what it's like to be black in Britain. I'm not going to say it's a picnic. I'm not going to say that everything's perfect. I'm not going to say that there aren't any legitimate issues. But what I will say, somewhat similar to the video I made about um, how feminists approach dialogue with men. If you are, if you're white, then you basically can't talk about race in in the sense that anything you say, will be taken as white supremacy, or it's it's just a very shackling thing because if you're white, then oh, you can't talk about race, or rather, you can't talk about racism. So that video I made discussing the BBC's usage of the N word, it's interesting. I got some negative responses to that video, which I half expected. Um, and just briefly touching on them. Let's see, I'll just get them up. I'm not gonna like quote for quote. It's Let's see if I could get them up. Just bear with me a second, please, because I've got a few different channels open. Excuse me, I can't. I've lost the page. That's got too many pages open. But basically, yeah, some of those comments were, I mean, I'm not going to say they were trolling, they were just disagreeing with me, and they're entitled to do that, you know. I wouldn't call someone a troll just because they disagree with me. But the interesting thing is, I didn't even use the word, and that's the response I got. It just goes to show that, you know, right now Fiona Lambden is probably keeping a low profile. And make no mistake about it, there will be people out there who are trying to destroy this woman. They're trying to destroy her career and, you know, really her life. And I really hope that doesn't happen. It would be an utter travesty if she's smeared as a racist because she was doing her job. And that's the atmosphere we're in, and it's an atmosphere that BLM has helped to create because they've put such sensitivity around the conversation about racism that basically what they're saying is we demand that you listen to us, but no one else can have an opinion on race or racism. And I think that's preposterous. I think it's totalitarian. Um, but you know, if you're white, like the argument is, well, white people can't complain because they're the majority. But I would say that white people are uniquely um, smeared, or rather, put on this pedestal of being accused of racism. Sure, you get black people who get accused of racism. You get Asian people accused of racism, but I insist that the consequences are nowhere near as bad. And no, I'm not talking about, I'm not saying white people are persecuted, but I am saying if a white person is accused of racism, even if it's a false accusation, totally taken out of context, the damage that causes to their reputation is profound. Um, if a Black Lives Matter activist is accused of racism, they get backed up by the movement and by, you know, the echo chamber mentality around that. Absolutely, there are situations where there have been double standards in how white people have been, the consequences that they've faced on racist accusation. For example, the one I've used a few times now, and I think it's relevant, is David Starkey versus Priyamvada Gopal. She's not black, she's Indian, but the point is she's not white. She made a racist statement. She gets praised and defended. Starkey made a racist statement. You know, he's forced to resign and apologize. I've often quoted regarding this particular story the thing about rappers. Now, I want to address that. Um, CJ Lee, that was the person who commented on my video. He said that I made some valid points, and he said that when it comes to journalistic integrity, the wishes of the family isn't the main thing. Well, I sort of see where you're coming from with that if you're watching this, but surely the fact that the reporter gave a disclaimer should count for something, but she didn't flippantly say it. That's point one. And point two, I'm sorry, but I disagree that there's any comparisons with the music industry. I mean, saying the music industry is irrelevant. Um, of course it's relevant. I mean, rappers, right, are very influential. They get millions of views on YouTube. So when they normalize the word, the M word, that's doing just that. It's normalizing it. So it just seems preposterous to try and destroy a reporter doing her job, yet say, "Oh well, black rappers can use it because they're black." The thing is, they're not taking ownership from racists, right? They're not saying we're using the word because we want to take ownership of it from white racists. No, they're using it against each other. Okay, I've heard enough rap songs to know the context of that. And the hypocrisy is so obvious. It's not alleged hypocrisy, it's hypocrisy. Um, Another argument I heard on that video is, I mean, in the comments, the responses is we own the word. Well, what I would say is I don't think white people should use it flippantly and try to avoid using it at all. But I have a big problem with this idea of owning words because then you get into a situation where, for example, you would have you would have expression so curtailed. I'll give an example. You would have a situation where no straight person could write a novel featuring a gay character because they would be appropriating that gay character, apparently. You know, the problem I have with this, I'm not arguing, by the way, for white people to use the word. I'm not saying, oh, give us the freedom to use the word. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying, however, that context is very, very important. And I find it deeply troubling that people want to destroy this woman's career for doing her job. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. People will say, oh, why hasn't she been fired? And I've seen this comparison with the musician Wiley, because he was banned from Twitter for pushing anti Semitic conspiracy theories. Now, he's showing no remorse for that. He was interviewed and he basically doubled down. There's no comparison. People say that's the double standards, but it's not because it's a totally different situation. Wiley was pushing anti Semitic conspiracy theories. The reporter was doing her job. So the reason she's not being fired, and I'm pleased she's not being fired, but the reason is because she wasn't using that in a derogatory way. She wasn't using it to attack black people. She was using it to quote an incident. I just find it very frustrating that people are just ignoring the context, and troubling as well, because that has implications. It's just a very sad situation. You know, I would simply say this: if you're more bothered by the usage of the word by a white reporter doing their job than the racist incident itself. I mean, this was a pretty bad case. The young guy was hit by a car, you know, it was a hit and run incident. He was badly injured. I don't understand. I mean, there's 18,000 complaints about the word, but you know, I could understand if black people responded angrily to that racist incident, but a lot of the critics seem to be more bothered by the use of the word than the incident itself. That makes no sense. And last point, you know, the issue about black on black gang violence, whenever that's raised, BLM activists say, "Oh well, that's another issue. It's already being addressed." You know, they try to downplay it, but there is nothing apart from coronavirus, which is killing a lot of people. But in normal circumstances, there's nothing that kills black people um, more than gang violence. I mean, certainly a lot more than white police officers. And I'm not saying it's totally ignored. I know that there's been, for example, rallies against knife crime and so on, which is important, but I really, really think that you know, white people have been put into a position where anything they say will be perceived to be an attack. And it's so shackling. Um, so basically, white people have a choice. You either wholeheartedly endorse Black Lives Matter and their rhetoric, you know, even though they have racists in their midst and they haven't condemned rioting and looting, they haven't. Um, you either totally endorse that or you just shut up and, you know, keep a low key. If you speak out, then you're a horrible racist. Now, my stance is I'm not saying that the concerns that BLM raise are totally illegitimate. I'm not saying that. I am, however, insisting that Black Lives Matter can't just bully people into silence. This is a very aggressive movement. It's not a peaceful movement. That's bullshit. It's not. You know, they're trying to bully people into silence. They're trying to cancel people, um, as we've seen from the unrest. it's not a peaceful movement. Okay, I'm not saying that the activists are going around attacking people. That's not happening. But there is definitely an aggressive angle to this. And there is an increased, I compare it to white gun nuts in the United States, actually. I've been very critical of them, but I see a similar thing happening with Black Lives Matter. As far as I'm concerned, it's starting to morph into something akin to the Black Panthers in the 70s. And they just ended up being basically criminals. They started off political, but they ended up just in extortion rackets and so on. Um, I really think BLM is doing a lot more harm than good for everyone. I'm very critical of this movement. I'm not saying that everyone in it is a bad person. For example, there was the guy that, saved the white man, that famous photograph. He carried the white guy away, the white counter protester. So there's obviously decent people in the movement, but I would implore those people to consider the image that this movement has and to consider the reasons why. It's not coming out of nothing. People see double standards. People see a situation where white people are being absolutely shackled in what they can say. Because, you might say, oh, well, you're freely making these videos. Yeah. But if I use the M word, you can be absolutely sure that I would be absolutely hounded by vitriolic messages. And, I'd probably be kicked off YouTube if I use that word. Now, I'm not saying I should have the right to use it, but that's the reality. Um, I don't know. I'm just I find myself getting increasingly depressed about the breakdown in race relations. I don't agree with those white people who think the solution is just to bow their heads in shame and, go around with white guilt. I think that's a lot of nonsense. Um, it is what it is.